Harbor lights. A man with blood on his leather jacket sat in a rusted metal chair, 30 feet above a concrete floor, holding nothing but a lighter and the knowledge that his oldest friend had used him as bait to murder his sister. 13 hours earlier, the rain had just begun. Leo Thorne sat slumped in a navy blue velvet armchair, his face illuminated only by the cold blue light of a laptop screen resting on his knees. The MacBook Pro cast sharp shadows under his eyes, dark circles that had deepened over a year of silence, a year of staring at photographs and scrolling through message threads that went nowhere. Outside, rain streaked the window in vertical lines, distorting the city lights into abstract smears of red and gold. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. Water against glass, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the occasional distant horn of a boat on the bay. He had been drinking. The empty glass of scotch on the side table bore the rings of multiple pours, the ice long melted into nothing. His index finger hovered over the trackpad as he scrolled through an old photo album titled Summer 2022. The images came up one by one, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He stopped on a photograph, himself and a man with a thick beard, both of them laughing on a boat, holding beer bottles high. The man was wearing a red cap, squinting into the sun. That man was Mark Vance. That was the friend who had disappeared. That was the friend who had stolen $50,000 and used Leo's forged signature to do it. The laptop screen flickered. A notification banner slid into the top right corner, the familiar blue bar of a messenger alert. The sender's name made Leo's breath catch, Mark Vance. The text was simple, urgent, merciless. I'm at the harbor bar. We need to finish this. Tonight. Leo's pupils dilated. His hand froze on the trackpad. The words glowed on the screen like an accusation, like a threat, like an invitation to something Leo wasn't sure he could survive. A year of waiting, a year of silence and unanswered questions had led to this moment, this message, this summons. He slammed the laptop shut. The room plunged into total darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain and the thunder of his own heartbeat. Then he stood up abruptly, his leg catching the side of the armchair. The empty Scotch glass rolled off the table and landed on the thick shag rug with a soft thud. It didn't break. Leo stood in the darkness, breathing hard, his fists already clenched. The black leather jacket came off the back of the chair. His hands shook as he fumbled with the zipper, up, down, up again. The metal teeth caught his skin once, and he yanked it free with a grimace. From the entryway bowl, he grabbed a set of keys. The brass L keychain caught what little light came from the street below. His mail was piled on the small table by the door, unopened, yellowing. Bills, probably. Legal notices. Things that didn't matter anymore. None of it mattered anymore. Mark had made sure of that. The alleyway behind the harbor bar was narrow and wet, steam rising from a manhole cover like something alive. Leo walked quickly, his boots echoing off the brick walls. Graffiti covered the surfaces, names and dates and gang marks that meant nothing to him. He checked his watch. 12:10 a.m. The silver Seiko face glowed in the darkness. The back entrance to the bar was close now, just a few more steps. His left calf burned from where the bat had hit him in a past he didn't want to remember. But the pain kept him sharp. That's when the two men stepped out from behind the dumpster. The first one was large, wearing a grease-stained hoodie that had probably been gray once. The second was lean and quick, his fingers wrapped around the shaft of a wooden baseball bat. They moved with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. They blocked Leo's path, and Leo stopped, raising his hands in a gesture that wasn't surrender, but something close to it. "You're Mark's shadow, aren't you?" The first one's voice was low and threatening, the kind of voice that had backed men down in dark places before. "Where's our money, Leo?" Leo didn't answer. He took a breath. But the baseball bat was already moving, a low, vicious swing aimed at his left calf. The bat connected with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the narrow space. Leo's leg buckled. Pain exploded from his lower leg, white and sharp and all-consuming. He collapsed to one knee, his hands gripping the wet ground, palms soaking up filthy water and worse things he didn't want to identify. The first thug reached down to grab Leo's collar. It was a mistake. Leo drove his forehead forward with everything he had, aiming for the bridge of the nose. The sickening crunch of bone followed immediately. Blood sprayed across Leo's leather jacket, hot and sudden. The man screamed, his hands flying to his face, and Leo used the momentum to drive forward, tackling him into the metal dumpster. The impact was enormous. The sound echoed through the alley. The second thug tried to swing again, but Leo was already moving, rolling away with the kind of desperation that burned out thought. He grabbed a discarded glass bottle from the ground, green and heavy, and smashed it against the brick wall. It shattered, leaving behind a jagged, dangerous neck. He held it out in front of him like a knife, his breathing ragged, his face feral. The thugs looked at each other. The first one was still bleeding, his nose crushed flat. The second one lowered the bat. In the distance, a police siren wailed, getting closer. They ran. Leo dropped the glass neck. It clinked against the pavement. Mark had forged it. Mark had taken his name and put it on a legal document committing him to $50,000 that he had never borrowed. Below the forged signature, the primary borrower was listed. Mark Vance. Leo pulled out a second sheet. It was a bank transfer receipt. The numbers made his vision narrow. $50,000 transferred from Leo Thorne, business account, to an offshore entity named Vance Holdings. The date was October 14th. The date Mark had gone silent. The date the friendship had ended without either of them knowing it. The date everything had died. Leo crumbled the papers into a ball, crushing them in his fist. His jaw locked. He looked at the heavy iron door of the bar, its surface slick with rain. His hand reached for the handle, not to talk, not to confront with words. His hand reached for it because something inside him had broken, and the only way to fix it was to see Mark's face when Leo showed him what he'd found. Rust stained his palm as he pulled the door open. The harbor bar was chaos and noise and heat. Smoke hung in thick clouds under the low ceiling. The music was loud, a pounding rock beat that Leo could feel in his chest. The place was packed with bodies, all of them smelling of beer and sweat and something else. The smell of people drowning their lives in liquid. Leo pushed through the crowd, his eyes scanning the booths, the corners, the dark places where desperate men like to hide. He saw Mark in the furthest booth, the one pressed against the back wall where no one could sneak up on you. Mark was wearing the same red cap from the photograph, but it was tattered now, fraying at the edges. He was nursing a glass of clear liquid, gin or vodka, something strong and something he was drinking alone. Mark looked gaunt, hollowed out, like something had been removed from him and the space had never filled back in. Leo slid into the booth opposite him. He slammed the crumpled ball of paper onto the sticky wooden table. It made a dull thud. Mark jumped. His eyes darted to the exit, calculating distances, evaluating escape routes. 50,000, Leo said. His voice was ice. And my name on a debt that isn't mine. Talk. Mark leaned forward, whispering now, his voice barely audible over the roar of the bar. His left hand stayed under the table, hidden. Leo noticed because his eyes were good at noticing things now, sharp things, dangerous things. Mark's right hand was visible, and it was ruined. 2 of the fingernails were gone completely. The beds were raw and red, the skin puffed up with infection or recent trauma. The knuckles were scarred. "I didn't steal it for me, Leo," Mark whispered. "They have Sarah. They used your account because they knew you wouldn't track it. They knew you'd come looking for me instead." Sarah was Mark's sister. Sarah had graduated 3 years ago, and Leo had bought her a gold heart necklace for the occasion. He'd watched her cry when she put it on. He'd thought of her as the little sister he'd never had. A tall man in a tailored gray suit walked past the booth. He didn't look at them. He just placed a hand briefly on Mark's shoulder, a gesture so small it might have been accidental. But Mark froze. His breath stopped. His entire body went rigid, like a rabbit recognizing the presence of a predator. The handler, because that's what Leo decided to call him, that tall man in the gray suit, walked past without acknowledging anyone. He was wearing a silver signet ring on his left hand. It caught the light as he moved deeper into the bar. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Leo reached for a steak knife on the table. His hand was steady now. The trembling had stopped. In its place was something else, a cold, crystalline clarity about what came next. "We need to finish this," Leo said. It was an echo of Mark's message, thrown back at him like a weapon. Tonight. What Leo didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Mark had already made the same decision. What Leo didn't know was that this night had been planned weeks ago, over encrypted messages and in dimly lit rooms that Leo would never see. What Leo didn't know was that he was being herded like an animal toward something much larger, much more violent, much more final than a simple confrontation with a thieving friend. 2 muscular guards in black t-shirts stepped toward the booth. One reached for Mark. Leo stood up in one motion, and his hand found a heavy glass beer pitcher on a nearby table. He smashed it over the first guard's head. The sound was enormous. Glass exploding, beer and foam flying everywhere, the acrid smell of spilled alcohol filling the immediate air. The guard went down like his strings had been cut. The second guard swung a heavy punch. Leo ducked. The fist whistled over his ear, the wind of it hot on his skin, and drove his own fist into the guard's solar plexus. All the air left the man's body in a rush. Leo followed with an uppercut, driving his fist up from his hips, putting his entire body weight into it. The guard crashed backward into a nearby table, flipping it over. Glasses shattered. People screamed. Leo was moving now, and he couldn't stop. The pain in his leg was just background noise, a dull throb beneath the adrenaline. The red cap on Mark's head became his focus. Everything else fell away. The music, the crowd, the lights. There was only the need to move, to fight, to break things until the world made sense again. The handler pulled a small silver derringer from his pocket. Leo saw it coming. He grabbed a bar stool, wooden, heavy, solid, and hurled it. The stool crossed the distance between them in less than a second. It hit the handler's arm just as the gun fired. The bullet went up into the ceiling and shattered a disco ball into thousands of tiny mirrors. The fragments rained down like the world was breaking apart, reflecting the chaos back at itself 1,000 times over. The fire alarm started to ring. Beep, beep, beep. Leo grabbed Mark by the collar and dragged him toward the kitchen. Mark was stumbling, half-conscious, his eyes wide with shock and something else. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that everything was about to change. The swinging double doors to the kitchen burst open under Leo's shoulder. Stainless steel surfaces reflected the chaos. The commercial dishwasher was running, steam rising from its open mouth like it was breathing. They had seconds, maybe less. Inside the kitchen, Leo pinned Mark against a stainless steel prep table. A row of chef's knives hung on a magnetic strip behind them, sharp and terrible and waiting. Leo's hands were shaking again, but this time with something beyond adrenaline. This time with something that tasted like betrayal. He grabbed a 10-inch carving knife from the magnetic strip. The blade caught the light. Leo held it to Mark's throat. Mark's hand shot into his pocket. He pulled out a burner phone and shoved the screen at Leo's face. The video showed Sarah, Mark's sister, Leo's almost sister, laughing. She was counting stacks of $100 bills. Next to her stood the handler, smiling. They were in some kind of penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city lights behind them. She wasn't kidnapped, Leo. Mark's voice was broken, fractured, like he was speaking from behind glass. She's the one running the game. She used me to get to your business accounts. I didn't steal your money for her. I stole it to bait her. I knew she'd come for the rest. I needed you to be the witness to her accident in that fire. The words didn't make sense. Leo's brain refused to process them. He stared at the screen. Sarah was wearing the gold heart necklace. She was blowing a kiss at the camera. She looked happy. The kitchen's back door exploded open. Sarah stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the rain-soaked alley beyond. She was holding a black Glock 17 pistol, and it was pointed directly at Leo's chest. She was wearing an expensive silk trench coat. Her hair was blown dry and perfect. She looked like someone who had just stepped out of a different life, a different universe where none of this was happening. She was smiling. Leo and Mark were taken to the docks. The warehouse there had been empty for a decade, its windows dark, its doors rusted shut. They arrived in a black SUV driven by people who didn't speak. By the time they were dragged inside, it was 1:15 a.m. Leo was zip-tied to a rusted metal chair in the center of the cavernous space. The zip ties were white plastic, cutting into his wrists. Mark was tied to another chair 5 feet away. Rain leaked through the roof in heavy drips, drip, drip, drip. The sound of water hitting concrete, of time passing, of decisions being made in the darkness above. Sarah walked circles around Leo, her high heels clicking on the warehouse floor. Click, 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 deliberately, ritualistically. She held a tablet showing a complex web of financial transactions. Leo's father's name appeared at the top corner of every document. "Your father started this, Leo," Sarah said. Her voice was conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "I just streamlined it. You were the perfect clean front for the money laundering. Your business, your accounts, your reputation. All I had to do was pull some strings." Leo looked at Mark. Mark wouldn't meet his eyes. Mark's shirt was torn, and his chest was a landscape of deep purple bruising. Mark had tried to stop her. Mark had fought, and he had lost. The handler returned at 1:30 a.m. He pulled a silenced pistol from his jacket. He nodded to Sarah. Then he walked toward Leo, aiming the barrel at Leo's forehead. Sarah turned her back, lighting a cigarette with a gold Zippo. The flame was small and perfect. She exhaled smoke into the darkness. Leo slammed his weight backward. The rusted chair legs snapped with a dry crack. He rolled on the floor, his hands still tied, and kicked the handler in the kneecap. The handler's leg bent at an angle it wasn't supposed to bend. A loud pop echoed through the warehouse. The handler screamed, a raw, animal sound that cut through the rain noise. Leo found a sharp piece of the broken chair leg and sawed it against the zip ties with frantic movements. The plastic stretched, frayed, snapped. The ties came apart. He lunged at the handler, pinning his arm and snapping the wrist back. Bone and sinew gave way. Sarah turned, pulling her own gun. Leo grabbed the handler's body and used him as a shield. Sarah fired twice. The bullets were silent, Suppressed, professional, but the impact was enormous. The handler's body jerked. Blood bloomed across his back. Leo held him up, using him like armor, and crawled behind a stack of wooden pallets. The gunfire stopped. The handler was dead. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. At 1:45 a.m., Mark tried to stand. He was still zip-tied, still helpless. But he pushed himself up on his feet anyway. He tried to block Sarah's line of sight to Leo. It was a gesture, maybe. A final attempt at redemption. A last effort to be something other than what he'd become. Sarah screamed in rage. She fired once. Mark fell backward against a heavy transformer, an electrical generator covered in decades of rust and oil. His shoulder was shattered. Blood poured from the wound. But the fall triggered something in the equipment. A short circuit, maybe, or a final failure of ancient wiring. The transformer began to spark. Blue electrical fire jumped from one contact to another, illuminating the warehouse in stuttering flashes of brilliant light. The sparks fell in lazy arcs, beautiful and terrible. Leo climbed the metal ladder to the catwalk. Sarah was shooting now, aiming carefully, her bullets pinging off the iron rungs. Ping, ping, ping. The noise was sharp and final. Leo climbed higher, faster, his hands slick with sweat and blood. He reached the top and ran toward the exit door. It was padlocked from the outside. He was 30 feet above the concrete floor with nowhere to go. The padding in his lungs was burning. His muscles were screaming. Sarah was climbing the ladder now, following him up. Leo reached into his pocket. He had nothing. No gun, no weapons, no options. All he had was the lighter he'd swiped from the handler. He looked down at the warehouse floor. The sparking generator was leaking oil. Black, slick, flammable. A trail of oil stretched across the concrete, and the end of that trail led directly to Sarah's feet. The electrical fire from the transformer was jumping and sparking, alive with current. Sarah was halfway up the ladder now, the gun steady in her hand. Leo flipped the Zippo open. The flame came to life, small and yellow and absolutely perfect. He dropped the lighter. The oil ignited with a whoosh that sucked the air out of the warehouse. A wall of fire erupted, racing across the floor like something alive. Sarah screamed and dived out of the way, but not before the flames engulfed her Glock. The gun fell into the fire and disappeared. The fire hit the sparking generator and the transformer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the explosion came. Not loud, but enormously powerful. A concussive force that blew out the warehouse windows and lifted Leo off his feet. The shockwave threw him against the exit door. His momentum combined with the force of the blast, and the padlock sheared off clean. The door burst open onto a fire escape. Leo staggered out into the rain, deafened, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. He could barely hear the sirens approaching from the distance. He could barely think. But Mark was still inside. He ran back through a lower side door. The room was thick with smoke now, an impenetrable gray soup that burned his lungs. He found Mark by feel more than sight, his hands grasping the wet fabric of Mark's shirt. He dragged his friend out of the building, both of them choking, both of them half-conscious. They collapsed on the wet pier as the sirens got louder. Red and blue lights were reflecting off the water now, painting everything in alternating shades of emergency. At 2:10 a.m., Mark sat up. His shoulder was bleeding, the wound gaping and terrible. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small digital drive. It was silver, no bigger than a thumb, no more substantial than a key. He held it out to Leo. His face had changed. The fear was gone. The pain was still there, but it had been subsumed beneath something else. A cold, sharp intelligence. It was the face of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. "I didn't steal your money for Sarah," Mark said. His voice was calm, analytical, almost friendly. "I stole it to bait her. I knew she'd come for the rest. I needed you to be the witness to her accident in that fire." Leo stared at the drive. Everything was on it. Everything. Sarah's crimes, her location, evidence that Mark had been forced. Mark had used Leo as a meat shield. Mark had used Leo as a legal alibi. Mark had used Leo as a tool to remove someone from his life. And Leo had done it without ever understanding what was really happening. Leo looked at his oldest friend. He saw a stranger looking back at him. A police officer approached with a thermal blanket at 2:30 a.m. Leo stood up. He handed the USB drive to the officer, but he didn't look at Mark. He pointed toward the burning warehouse where Sarah was being led out in handcuffs, her silk coat singed and smoking, her perfect hair streaked with ash. Her mascara was running down her face in black lines, and her eyes were wide with the shock of someone who had just learned that betrayal could be a two-way street. Mark tried to stand. His arm reached out for Leo's sleeve. Leo pulled his arm away. He dug into his pocket and pulled out the red cap. Mark's red cap, the one from the bar, the one from the boat, the one from the photograph of a friendship that had never really existed. He dropped it into a puddle at Mark's feet. "The 50 grand was a cheap price to find out you were both dead to me," Leo said. His voice had no inflection, no emotion, just facts. "Don't call again." Leo walked away from the docks. He walked through the police line without looking back. He pulled a cigarette from a pack he'd taken from the handler, and the lighter he'd recovered from the water ignited it with a small, perfect flame. For 1 second, the fire illuminated his face. Harder than it had been that morning, older. But something else too. Something that looked like clarity. He walked into the night, leaving the red and blue lights behind him. His boots moved on dry pavement. The cigarette smoke trailed behind him like a ghost. And then even that faded away into the rain-soaked darkness. Behind him, sirens wailed. Behind him, men in uniforms were writing reports and taking statements. Behind him, Mark was being arrested, and Sarah was being thrown into a police car, and a world that had been balanced on a knife edge was finally, violently, reorganizing itself into something new. But Leo wasn't looking back. He was walking and breathing and smoking a cigarette that tasted like ashes. He was alone, which was what he had wanted all along, though he hadn't known it until now. The harbor lights reflected off the wet streets, making pathways of gold and red and blue. He followed them without knowing where they led. He simply walked and did not look back.